Tonight we are going to sit with a small island in the north, and the people who arrived on it about 1100 years ago. It is a true story, and it moves slowly, because that is how it actually happened. There is nothing here you need to remember. No names will be tested. If you lose the thread and drift off in the middle, that is exactly what this is for. You can let the words go by like weather outside a window. I will keep my voice low, and we will begin at the sea. Imagine the North Atlantic in the late 800s. Grey water, long swells, a sky that goes on for a very long way. Somewhere on that water is an open wooden boat. It is not enormous. It has a single square sail, oars along the sides, and a hull of overlapping planks that flexes a little with each wave, which is part of why it does not break. On board are people. Not warriors on a raid, but a household. A man and a woman, perhaps, and children, and the people who worked for them, and one or two who had no choice about coming. There are also animals. Sheep, tucked between the cargo. A cow, if the family could manage it. Chickens in a crate. Bags of grain seed. Iron tools, which were valuable and heavy. Blankets of coarse wool, soaked with spray. They are sailing west, away from Norway, or from the islands off Scotland, and they are going somewhere almost empty. That is the strange thing about this story. Most human migrations are into places where other people already live. This one was not. Iceland, when they arrived, had no farms, no fields, no roads, no towns, and no one to ask permission from. Whatever they built, they would be building first. Almost empty, though, is not quite the same as empty. There were probably a few people there already, and they were monks. Irish sources, and the Icelanders themselves, mention men the Icelanders called the Papa. Hermits from Ireland who had sailed out into the ocean looking for solitude, in small boats made of hide stretched over a wooden frame. An Irish monk named Dykwill, writing in the year 825, describes clerics who had spent a summer on an island in the far north where at midsummer the nights were so light you could pick the lice from your shirt at midnight. That is such a specific, ordinary detail that historians have always taken it seriously. It sounds like something a man would actually say. Whether that island was Iceland is not certain, but it fits well. When the Norse arrived, the story goes, these hermits left, because they did not wish to live among people who were not Christian. We have not found much of them in the ground. A few place names with Papi in them. Some possible traces, argued over for decades. It is one of those corners of history where the evidence is thin and honest people disagree. So we will not pretend to more than we know. There may have been a handful of quiet men on that coast, and then there were not. The settlement period has a name in Icelandic. Landnám. It means, roughly, the land taking. And here is the genuinely remarkable thing, the one idea I would like to leave with you tonight, because it is so simple and so satisfying. We can date it, almost to the year, using ash. Iceland sits on a volcanic ridge. Volcanoes there erupt fairly often, and when they do they throw out fine ash that drifts on the wind and settles over the whole island in a thin pale layer. Then grass grows over it, and soil builds up above it, and it stays. One of these layers is famous. It is greenish and pale, and it is found across most of Iceland, and it can be dated very precisely, because the same eruption left a matching chemical signature in the Greenland ice sheet, where the ice is layered year by year like tree rings. That layer settled in the year 877, give or take a year or two. And when archaeologists dig up the very oldest turf farms in Iceland, they almost always find them sitting on top of that ash. Not below it. On top. Which means, the farms came after. The whole first chapter of a country, pinned down by a layer of dust. The Icelanders themselves said the first permanent settler was a man named Ingolfur Arnason, who came from Norway and made his home at a place he called Reykjavik, the Smoky Bay, for the steam rising off the hot springs. The traditional date is 874. That is close enough to the ash layer to be interesting, though we should be careful. The story was written down 2.5 centuries later, and the neatness of it, one first man, one first place, is the kind of tidiness that stories acquire over time. What is more certain is the shape of what followed. Over about 60 years, boatload after boatload arrived. Perhaps 10,000 people in all, perhaps 20. They came mostly from western Norway, and a great many came by way of Ireland and the Scottish Isles, bringing with them Gaelic wives, Gaelic servants, Gaelic slaves, and Gaelic names. Modern genetic studies have made this rather vivid. Icelandic men's ancestry leans strongly Scandinavian. Icelandic women's ancestry leans strongly towards Britain and Ireland. The island's founding population was mixed from the very first day, whatever the sagas preferred to say about it. What did they find when they got there? A country that was greener than it is now. This surprises people. We picture Iceland as bare, black, wind-scoured, and much of it is. But the settlers described a land forested from the mountains to the shore, and the pollen records in the bogs agree with them. Low birch woodland, scrubby and dense, covering perhaps a quarter of the island. There were no land mammals except the Arctic fox. No people to fight. No trees large enough for shipbuilding, but enough for fuel and charcoal, and enough to clear. So they cleared it. They burned and cut and let the sheep in, and the sheep ate the seedlings, and the birchwoods did not come back. Within 200 or 300 years most of them were gone, and the thin volcanic soil, no longer held by roots, began to blow away. It was not carelessness exactly. It was a farming system that worked perfectly well in Norway, meeting a landscape that could not take it. They were doing the ordinary things people do, and the ordinary things turned out to be too much. Iceland has been slowly replanting ever since. A farm, then. Picture 1. It is built of turf, because turf is what there is. Thick blocks of sod cut from the ground and stacked into walls a meter or more deep, with driftwood or imported timber for the roof beams. From outside it looks like a long green hummock with smoke coming out of it. Inside it is dim and warm and smells of wool, smoke, milk and earth. There is a long central hearth. Along the walls are raised platforms where people sit in the day and sleep at night, all together, under sheepskins. The animals may be at one end, or in their own building close by, and their warmth is not wasted. Outside, the home field, the tun, is walled and manured and mown for hay, because hay is the whole difference between a flock that survives the winter and one that does not. Beyond that, open grazing. Down at the shore, seals, seabirds, eggs, driftwood, and fish. It is a life of very little cash and a great deal of careful counting. How many bales of hay? How many sheep? How many mouths? Nobody in this story is rich in the way we mean it. They are rich in stock and in standing. With no king and no lord, they had to invent a way to settle arguments. What they built is one of the more unusual things in medieval Europe. Around the year 930, the settled families agreed to meet each summer at a place of pale rock and water and a long cleft in the earth, at the edge of a great lake. They called it Thingvellir, the assembly plains. For 2 weeks each summer, people came from across the island. They pitched booths of turf and cloth. They brought cases and goods and gossip. They arranged marriages and traded cloth and heard news. And in the middle of it, the law was recited aloud. There was an officer called the law speaker, elected for 3 years, and his job was to stand at the rock and speak 1/3 of the entire law code from memory each year, so that over his term the whole of it had been said out loud in public. There were no written statutes at first. The law existed as sound, in a man's head, renewed once a summer in front of everyone. If he made an error, learned men would correct him. It is one of the most human legal systems ever devised, and it held the island together for more than 3 centuries. Now the second half of the story, which happens much later, indoors, in winter. The settlement was over. The generations turned. Iceland became Christian, by a vote at the assembly around the year 1000, in a decision so pragmatic it is almost funny. The law speaker went away, lay down under a cloak for a day and a night, thought about it, and came back and said the country would be Christian, but that people might keep some old customs quietly at home. With Christianity came the Latin alphabet, and with the alphabet came ink, and parchment made from calfskin, and men and women who could write. And what they chose to write, alongside the church books, was their own past. Their grandparents' quarrels. Who settled which valley? Who had killed whom over a horse, or a hayfield, or an insult, and how it was eventually settled. They wrote it in Icelandic, not in Latin, which was itself unusual. They wrote it in long, dry, flat prose, with almost no adjectives and very little emotion stated outright. And in doing so, they made something that had no real model anywhere in Europe. We call them the sagas. Most were written down in the 13th and 14th centuries, 200 or 300 years after the events they describe. That gap matters, and the honest thing is to say so plainly. The sagas are not eyewitness reporting. They are not simply fiction either. They sit somewhere in between, in a region we do not have a good modern word for, family memory, polished by retelling, shaped by a writer with a point of view, and set down at a time when Iceland was losing its independence and had reason to think fondly of its beginnings. Where we can check them against other evidence, they get some things impressively right, the layout of farms, the workings of the law, the names of places, and some things clearly wrong. So a saga is a good guide to how Icelanders in the year 1250 imagined the year 950, and a rough and uneven guide to the year 950 itself. There is one more thing about them, though, which is not about accuracy at all. They are extraordinarily good. Quiet, sardonic, unhurried, full of ordinary people doing ordinary and terrible and funny things, written in a voice that still sounds startlingly modern. Think about the making of one. It is January. The daylight lasts perhaps 4 hours and it is never quite bright. A household is shut in together in a long turf room. The work of the season is indoor work, and most of it is wool. Carding, spinning, weaving on an upright loom weighted with stones. It is repetitive, it needs the hands and not much of the mind, and it goes on for hours. This is what the evening reading was for. Someone reads or recites, and everyone else works, and the story fills the hours. The Icelanders had a word for it later, the kvöldvaka, the evening wake. Somewhere in a room like that, in a monastery or on a large farm, a man is scraping a calfskin smooth, cutting it, ruling lines, mixing ink from berberis or from soot. Parchment is expensive. A single manuscript might use the skins of dozens of animals. He is spending real wealth to write down a quarrel between farmers who died before his great-grandfather was born. Nobody made him do it. That is the part one finds hard to get over. A very small, very poor population, at the edge of the map, decided that its own ordinary past was worth the price of the calves. So we leave them there. The ash layer under the oldest walls. The birch woods that came and went. The law speaker at the rock in summer, saying the law out loud so that everyone could hear it. And a dim room in January, wool turning on a spindle, a low voice going on, and someone in the corner writing it down by firelight. Sleep well. There is nothing to keep hold of. Let it all settle, the way ash settles, quietly, over everything, and stays.